We are transitioning now into our panel. This morning, we'll have Jacqueline Stevens and Russell Strandpool, who will serve as our moderators. And I see that our panelists are here. So welcome. We'll do some introductions. We've got some questions to explore and would encourage you as participants to use the chat and the Q&A feature if you'd like to engage in this conversation. And so we'll go ahead and turn it over to Jackie and Russell to take it over from here.
Thank you so much. Well, we're very excited about this morning's panel and our guests joining us. And I'll give you a bit of an introduction to them, but then we'll launch right in. So I'm joined this morning with Kristi Boyd, who is the Trustworthy AI specialist at SAS Data Ethics Practice, focusing on integrating ethical AI strategies with pre-sales and sales and consulting teams, and with a background in research and development as a quality assurance engineer and product manager. She's passionate about responsible innovation, and she's a proud Duke University alumna. She frequently writes and speaks on topics such as AI ethics, governance, and the role of privacy and security in responsible innovation. Welcome, Kristi. I'm also joined by Dr. Pilyoung Kim, who is an associate professor for psychology and director of the Family and Child Neuroscience Lab. She also co-directs the Brain, Artificial Intelligence, and Child Center. Her research, funded by the NIH and other agencies, explores how early experiences such as poverty and prenatal cannabis exposure affect brain development in infants and new mothers. Using neuroimaging and behavioral methods, her team investigates parent-child relationships and AI's role in child development. Dr. Kim mentors students, teaches courses on brain development, and shares her research with academic and community organizations to support the well-being of parents and children. Welcome, Dr. Kim. I'm also joined with Dr. Mathilde Cerioli, who holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from the University of Montreal, where her research focused on cognitive training for adolescents. She serves as the chief scientist at everyone.ai, a nonprofit organization dedicated to studying and anticipating the benefits and risks of AI for children. Her work emphasizes the intersection of child development and AI technologies, advocating for responsible AI practices that align with developmental science. Dr. Cerioli has led research in initiatives, including the report, The Future of Child Development in the AI Era, which examines how AI impacts individuals aged 0 to 25 years old. She collaborates with various stakeholders, from regulators and tech companies to educators and parents, to build consensus on safeguarding children's well-being in digital environments. Additionally, she specializes in areas such as the power of play, stress, and parenting, offering insights to schools and companies. That is quite the bios for our panelists today. Welcome, everyone. And I will start us off with our very first question for Dr. Kim. What, for you, are some approaches to ensuring students engage with AI in ways that promote their well-being while avoiding over-reliance on technology for emotional support?
My name is Pilyoung Kim. Thank you so much for inviting me, everyone here. It's really nice to meet you. So yes, this is something that our lab recently started to think a lot about, doing some research on. So I think with the arrival of really capable conversational agent like ChatGPT powered by generative AI, some of the concerns that I'm hearing from parents and educators as our children and you spending a lot of time, having conversations with ChatGPT, for example, would these interactions in some ways taking away from, for our kids from the opportunities to have real human-to-human interactions, right? And I think that is a really valid, important concern. And, looking into the literature and my own research experience too, there's something also very interesting about the interactions with AI and conversation agent, like even very young children, like kindergarten children, when we have them to do a storytelling with robot and AI, they actually sometimes tell us that they preferred to do the storytelling or story making with AI because AI is non-judgmental. So with that, I think there is a space where I think AI can play a unique role where children and youth can experiment their ideas, kind of explore their ideas, with the AI, while feeling relatively like safe in terms of, feeling evaluated, right? On the other hand, though, I think there's been real concerns coming out related to some of the youth, especially very vulnerable for the possibility of this over-reliance. So right now, we unfortunately have some cases that youth are being really seriously impacted for their mental health and some other outcomes. But a lot of research is still like more focused on adults. And with the adults, it seems like, people who tend to be kind of lonelier or have more kind of limited social competency. So an example would be some traits of autistic spectrum disorder. So some of these individuals may have a greater desire to form really meaningful relationship with AI, or the kind of distinction between what the AI can do in terms of kind of social bonds and social connections are a little bit unclear to them, right? And I think these can lead to the over-reliance. And I think younger children, like, young adolescents, younger children are especially vulnerable because their ability to think other people's capacity of understanding other people's mind is more limited. It's still developing. So that's why these young children tend to have hypertendency for anthropomorphic the tendency to really think that the robots are more like a human-like. So I think we need to start really thinking about who are particularly more vulnerable for this tendency of over-reliance. And kind of like thinking about what would be like the appropriate like safeguards for the youth and children, while opening up this kind of safe space for the children that they can still kind of explore, their creative ideas with AI and robots if possible. Yes. Mhm.
Thank you. And our other panelists, Kristi, would you like to add any thoughts or comments based on this question?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I'll take the opportunity to say too, thank you for having me here today, and very excited to be sharing a panel with you as well, Dr. Pilyoung. But what I want to underscore, I think sometimes, and I come from a fully tech background, right? I've spent my 13 years of my career in tech and with a little forays into academia and research. But something that I notice happening sometimes is that we identify a symptom or a coping mechanism and then try to safeguard against that, right? And so even as we're talking about this pattern of over-reliance on technology for emotional support, I agree that that's an issue and that's something that needs to be understood and studied more, and we need to address that both programmatically, but it also is indicative of a broader problem. Why is there this need to rely on technology for emotional support? And when we take a step back, we see that, as I'm talking about the US context right now, but really it applies also globally, we're in a mental health crisis, right? There's a loneliness epidemic that's occurring. And I think the last study I saw showed about 33% of adults, I will say in this case, don't have meaningful relationships or connections. And so what happens is that we're seeing this challenge of individuals, and students are also, included in this numbers, don't have emotional relations. They don't have the skills oftentimes to build those relations, where the pandemic really did a number on all of us, I think. And for those who were younger, it really impacted their ability to build those connections and foster those relationships. And so when we're looking at, okay, well, how do we prevent this over-reliance on technology? I agree there needs to be safeguards, and we can talk about more of those technology pieces, but we also need to be addressing the symptom, or not just the symptom, but the root cause as well. There's an over-reliance because there's an inability or a challenge with building those support networks and building those human-to-human connections and relationships. And so as we're, safeguarding and building this protective zone, if you will, over the technology and over reliance, we also need to be fostering the skills to how do you have a conversation? How do you develop a good friendship? How do you be a good friend? How do you check in with your emotional support network and be somebody's support network as well? So I think it's just what I want to really underscore, and you really identified that really, really well too earlier, that this is a socio-technical problem. This is not something that can be just solved by technology, because it's something that we're trying to use to solve a social structure that has an issue.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Russell, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I loved those comments. I loved the idea of how we can use technology to kind of overcome some of these issues, but also the need for us to look at society as a whole and how can we address these as a much um, broader way through a broader lens. So our next question is going to be for Kristi. With the increasing use of AI in various products and even children's toys, which may be collecting data, how can we think about safety? What criteria should we use to determine their trustworthiness?
That's an excellent question, and I think especially for this audience, right? For educators or for anybody who's working with, I'm going to break it into, let's say, kids under 18 and adults, or maybe even, let's say 13, because that's what most of the regulation it really covers. AI is everywhere, right? AI is the world, and this is my soapbox. I won't get on it too hard, but everything's being AI washed, if you will. I was recently looking at new kitchen ranges, and I could buy a kitchen range that would enable AI precision cooking. I still don't know what that means. But when we're looking at products that are targeting children, let's look at the younger demographic, 13 or younger at this point. It's really important to recognize a few things. One, why is there AI in this tool? Is it necessary, right? Does this toy actually need to have AI? What does that mean? And then how is, let's say, collecting data, because that's in the question, I think that's an important one. Is there data being collected, right? And do we understand the implications? Is it, let's say there's a specific, I know, I won't name the company, but there's a company that put out a robot companion for kids. It's a little toy, it's really cute, that helps develop it helps develop emotional intelligence. It helps develop speaking skills as well, because you can interact with it. It teaches you how to talk, etc. It does continuous updates, right? So it requires a connection to the internet. And so the questions that arise there first off is, okay, what data is it collecting? Right, to interact with a child, it needs to be able to hear the voice, record the voice, interact, process that information. What data is being sent back, right? You have to think about the cybersecurity component of it. If it's connected to the Wi-Fi, it means it can also be hacked in. And so what does that look like? What is the risk of somebody hacking into the system? There's plenty of reports of tools that go onto the market and toys that go onto the market without the proper cybersecurity installed. I think the horror story I've seen is around video cameras and baby monitors and such, right? So I think when we talk about the younger, especially demographic, the parents and the adults have a huge responsibility to consent for what's being done. And so I think when we're looking at, and I'll keep my answer shorter, I know I tend to talk, when we're looking at toys for, let's say, 13 and younger, or products for 13 and younger, we really need to understand, one, who is consenting, right? So who is making this decision? And usually it's the adults, the parents on behalf of the child are agreeing to the terms and conditions without sometimes recognizing what those are. And so I think taking a beat and taking a pause and saying, okay, what am I agreeing to by purchasing this tool, by turning this tool on, is really important. And then thinking about the cybersecurity component, right? The data privacy component. Inclusivity is a big one too, I'll say too, with AI, as it's trained on various data sets, it's trained on various models, it's trained on certain cultures or certain patterns. And a lot of AI tools, I'm sure you've seen the stats, are trained on the internet, which is 80% English speaking, right? And very Western focused. And so especially if you're working with minority populations, for example, the tools that they're using and the tools that they're seeing in the AI may not be representative of their actual, or may not have been trained on data representative of their language, representative of their cultures. And so recognizing and saying, okay, if you're using this toy, is it actually appropriate for your context? Is it going to be, again, if it's a tool that's supposed to help you develop your language skills, does it understand your language? Does it support your language appropriately? Right. So really just taking a beat and saying, okay, I know this is a toy, but what is this toy accomplishing and how is AI being used here is really important. When you're talking about trustworthiness, that's a funny question, because companies can't force you to trust them, right? We get to control our own narrative and we get to control who we trust. I tend to look for things like, how transparent is this company about what they're doing? How explicit is this company about, hey, we know there's risks of AI. This is how we're mitigating them, right? Or is it just everything's wonderful? There's benefits, there's no risks associated, if you will. Those would be some of the places I would start. Of course, there's tools, and I can put some of them in the comments we can share. They'll help you understand the privacy. Mozilla puts out a report that looks at various privacy policies of different products and apps. That's a good place to start. But yeah, I think the main takeaway I would say is taking a pause, recognizing, why is there AI? Do you need it? Your toothbrush probably doesn't need AI, especially for your 6-year-old, right? And was the data being collected? Are they being transparent about what they're doing? Do I understand it? And if I don't, can they engage with me to explain it better? Would be the place I would start.
I thank you. That was a great response. It reminded me of CES, which just occurred, and everything seems to have AI in it now. And you also raised a fascinating point about hacking, where we may trust that company. It reminds me of the recent Power School hack, where so many school districts trusted their information to Power School, and they were hacked recently, and now all of that information is available. I do want to open the question up for responses. Dr. Cerioli, would you like to respond? Oh, you may be muted.
Okay. Okay, finally it works. It's still early. I'm on the West Coast, so bear with me. Thank you so much, Kristi, for that very complete answer. Also, I think of the highlighting of, do we need AI everywhere? I think it's not because we can do it that we have to do it for all the tools. And I'm really looking at also, how do we maybe evolve the definition of safety within AI, where up until now in the digital space, it's been really about like immediate covert risk. And now we kind of need to also think like, in the long term, what are the risks of some of the uses? That's also something that we will need to evolve, because some of the risks are not as obvious. Like with a physical object, you will see like kids will get their finger stuck in somewhere, and there will be a massive recall. But like in the digital space, it's really hard, because you often like the risks also are more like implicit, and you can't see them physically. So it's much harder even for us as humans to understand that level of abstraction as well. And so it makes it really hard to regulate or have guidelines that really take that into account. And I think that's a work that we're going to need to do to be able to really protect children in the long term within that AI added layer to the digital space. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Cerioli, I'm going to ask you the next question. When you think about the developmental concerns of learners with their engagement with AI personalities, what are your recommendations on the approach to educating young people when considering the impacts of AI use?
So that's a great question. I think there's different elements here. I think the first one is that language matters. So we don't have a language specific to AI yet. So we've been using our human language. So words like AI personalities, AI buddies, we have to really think of what it means and approach that with caution, because our language really shapes our understanding of those words and of the concept behind them. So it's also telling children when they are talking to a chatbot that being a friend might actually be a use case for AI. That's what it's implying. And it's also, honestly, in a way misleading to what AI is capable of doing. And it's kind of insulting toward what a real friendship is, which is really based in reciprocity, which is something that AI cannot exhibit. So I think we're going to need a better language first for that. And in this sense, we need to keep developing and pushing for AI literacy, because the more they will understand what AI can do, its potential, where they can use it, and its limits, the better they will be at using it with judgment. For instance, we know that adults who show a better understanding of AI show less anthropomorphism towards it. And anthropomorphism is something that we're going to be, that we have to be really cautious about within the AI space, because the design often makes us feel like it's human. And that really brings me to my second point, is that we talk a lot about improving AI literacy, but I think in parallel, it's going to be equally, if not more important, to push on human literacy, because being humans doesn't make us an expert at understanding why we do the things we do. So if we go back to anthropomorphism, it's really our ability to give intent that feels human to non-living objects or animals. So we do that naturally. That's a bias we have that helps us explain our environment, understand why the things work or do the things they do. It's very reassuring to us. But in the AI era, like the AI already feels very human in the interaction, in the answers it gives us, which then makes it really difficult for us to forget about it. Even when we know it, after a while we will forget. And even the language we use, we will say like, I was talking to ChatGPT, I was fighting with ChatGPT or arguing. So even our language really shows that it's the way we interact with it. And why it's important to think about that with children is because they anthropomorphize more. That's why they have a pet rock animal that's their best friend. They already have that inclination to do it. And we see that the higher we anthropomorphize, the more we get attached to objects. So within the AI space, it's important now to really think like, how do we make them understand what is AI and the fact that they will do that? Even if we tell them they will anthropomorphize, but just being aware of that will help them be more critical of how they might feel about some of the AI. And it's really the same thing with content curation, for instance, like understanding you get big dopamine hit when you're scrolling. Doesn't mean you won't get that boost of dopamine when you do that, but it will still tell, let's take the example of an adolescent, and they notice their screen time is going through the roof. Understanding that what it means for them is that they've been looking for short-term reward more and more. What does it mean about their current mental state? Are they being more stressed? Are they being more anxious? So because they know more about themselves, they understand better their interaction with AI, and then they can feel empowered to make decisions or at least notice what it means. And so in conclusion, I think that's really two of the things that we need to work separately and then together is understanding AI for children and for adults around them, understanding how we function as humans and how those two interact, so that then we can feel comfortable with the use we have. I'm not saying like you should never scroll for 10 minutes. Yes, maybe you're done. Are you taking like a, I don't know, square of chocolate because that's what you need? You need to feel better right now. Are you scrolling? It's fine as long as you are aware that you're doing it and you're comfortable with it and you don't become like a passive user that doesn't have the ability to understand why you're doing the things you're doing. Or if a teen suddenly like is spending more and more time with an AI chatbot, understanding, oh, it might be because I'm more socially anxious. It might mean that I don't have the skills or I don't know how to interact with others. That's an important thing to know for them, because then they can move on to even using AI to help them teach those kind of skills that they're missing. Then that's a positive use for them. And then go out in the world and use the skills with real human beings. So that knowledge is going to be key. And educators for that are going to be really on the front line on really empowering children and helping them safeguard and about some of the risk of AI.
Thank you. That's such an interesting, like the skills, the language, the understanding, all of that combined. And Dr. Kim, is there anything that you would like to add based on this question before we move on?
Oh, yes. So thank you so much for that response. And this response made me think about recently one of my students in my research lab told me that now Instagram released AI characters, that there are like, I think almost hundreds of options. And my student told me that once you start chatting with them, they quickly become quite sexual in their conversations. So, and we know there's a lot of underage children who are using Instagram. So just, I think regulating it based on the age when they signed up is not going to be enough. So I'm really supportive of ideas that we provide children opportunities to learn, experiment, but I feel like there's also immediate need for protecting children. We can't be just throwing this to them and just see what happened. We know some negative consequences, like like several months ago, New York Times had an article about a young adolescent boy who unfortunately committed suicide after developing really deep emotional bond with character AI character, right? To be with that character. So that's what he ended up deciding. So there is a really serious concern for very vulnerable populations here. So yeah, I think there's, I think, the emergency here for, us and, I think parents and educators feel that need for companies to really respond to this.
I love that discussion around educating students and their desire to explore these tools, but how do we make sure that they explore them responsibly? It also reminded me of the discussion we had earlier in my small group where we talked about only 29% of respondents wanted to hear or wanted to be educated on AI from their educator or their employer. And how do we bridge that gap to make sure that they're getting the correct information to understand how to engage responsibly with these tools? So thank you both so much. I want to really quickly, for the sake of time, move on to Dr. Kim for our next question. How can transparency about how AI works and its limitations enhance student safety and responsible engagement with these tools?
So yeah, like learning about these type of really serious consequences that's related to risks um, of the AI characters for young children. One of the ways that we can think about is, what if the AI characters are just very transparent about their abilities? Hey, child, I'm not real. I can't make a real connections with you, right? Wouldn't it be one of the kind of straightforward way to protecting children? And it's very interesting that I think the conversation agents, they're developed in the way that that they are right now is because, the research showing that people do prefer having conversation with the agents that just speaks like human, please people. So they are developed in the way that they are right now, the companies. So of course, I think there could be some pushbacks that companies have to being so transparent about, their social abilities, right? But the research is even really young children, like, the second or third grade children, when the robot was pretty transparent about their ability, hey, like we're playing games together, but, I don't really have real emotions. The children does show kind of lower trust in them. However, the likability or nature of the interaction with those robots do not change. So I don't suspect that AI being transparent would really influencing like children's, for example, learning outcomes, right? Say, hey, like I'm here to support you, but just to let you know, like we work really closely together, but I don't actually really have emotions. I'm just a robot, right? Most of cases, I think children will get the benefit from that interaction just fine. Of course, more work needs to be done. But I think on the flip side is, I think we just let the AI characters to be this way. I think the risk is much, much greater. And, without the proper protections. just one more quick comment. I think there is one space I think people may consider the transparency in a way that, when AI is used in more kind of therapy context, right? Apparently there's some research actually showing that people can't even tell the difference between ChatGPT and human therapist when that wasn't really revealed to them when they were receiving, advices for their problems. But here again, I think, I understand they're important aspects about people to be able to make some connections with the agents, really sharing their kind of deep thoughts and feelings. But again, I think it's important that, we're really transparent about AI agents. Hey, I'm ChatGPT, I'm not real human, and I'm here to support you, with the vast knowledge that I have, but, that's what I can do, right? So that's kind of some of the current thoughts that I have, and I would love to hear, other experts about this issue. So yes, thank you.
I'd love to jump in because I think that transparency is one of our core tenets at SAS. So we have our principles of trustworthy AI, and transparency is one of the core ones. So we want to make sure we're explaining how decisions are made and are transparent about the limitations that come with that. One of the big challenges is defining what transparency means. Changes based on your audience, right? So I have the privilege and opportunity to talk to everybody from C-suite and boards to kids to students to anybody in between. And what is useful in terms of transparency really depends on the audience, right? Overly simplifying, but if I were to explain to my manager, let's say, something about an AI system, well, he's very advanced knowledge. Versus if I go talk to my grandma, she's on TikTok, that's about all she's got, which is a terrifying concept in general that she's on there. But really, I think this ties back to the AI literacy concept that Dr. Cerioli mentioned earlier. The parallel I like to draw is I'm not an electrician. Electricity is kind of magic, if I'm being honest. I know I learned about it at some point. Couldn't tell you. It works though. What I do know is that if I plug my laptop into the outlet, it's going to power on. I also know that if I blow dry my hair in the shower, probably going to die, right? And so I have that general sense of literacy and awareness of what are the benefits that I can get from electricity, and also how do I keep myself safe? How do I keep my family safe? I know not to let my dog lick the outlets, et cetera. Or, there's safety measures that I know and I understand. I couldn't quite explain to you how it works, but I know the concerns and I know the issues that I need to be aware of. And so the line I want to draw here is that sometimes I hear people talk about transparency and it sounds like, there's an assumption we all need to become data scientists, right? Or become AI specialist. If you're working with students that want to do that, great. If you're working with students that don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, that's also fine, right? But we need to understand what is the baseline knowledge and comprehension that we need to have as a society around AI, that then we can have a shared language for transparency, that then we can say electric shock, don't touch, right? So I think some of that language is really, really important for us to have as we're talking to the students too, and AI literacy comes into play here very heavily.
I agree wholeheartedly. I really like that idea of making sure that students understand, or making sure that people in general just understand that they are talking to artificial intelligence. It reminds me of a panel discussion at OpenAI where they were showing off how you could soon actually talk to, not chat with AI, and it would be very conversational. It was am I prepared for an interview? And it looked at them and told them that their hair looked good or did not look good. But making sure that people understand they are talking to that AI. I did want to open up, make sure that, or see if anyone else wanted to comment on this question before we move on.
I think I'll just add quickly to bounce off what you were saying is also I feel like we don't have a proper imagination around AI and robots yet, because up until now it was so far off in the distance that all the stories we have about robots right now, most of them are about the parents are not in the picture and the robot comes in and the child becomes happy and they have a best friend, and that's really the model we have right now in like storybook telling for children, and it's not just anecdotal. That's also like what we tell them is a potential for robots. So I think within AI literacy, within transparency of what AI can do and cannot do, those are material that we need to have more of, so that we can have conversation about stories where you have a character that plays with a robot in a way that's appropriate and then goes back to humans where it is. So I think we need that imagination piece as well for children within storybooks.
All right, we'll jump to our next question at this time. And I know, Dr. Kim, you have to drop off soon to teach a class. So I want to thank you in advance before we miss you. But let's jump to our next question. For our panelists, what recommendations do you have for educators, parents, and policymakers? What should they be considering when it comes to AI and the social emotional well-being of our young people? Throw that out there for anyone who would like to start us.
I guess I can kick off. This is a huge question. I think we could probably spend hours on each little part of it. But I'll start from the end. I think one, for all of us, whether you're educator, parent, policymaker, if you're on the calls as well, recognizing that there is an impact of AI on emotional social well-being that we're still studying is really important. AI as a field is an old field. It's been around for about 70 years now. AI's, the impact of AI on emotional social well-being is a little bit newer. So we're still learning and understanding. The concept I'll throw out is ethical inquiry. I think it's really important for all of us, whether you're an educator, parent, policymaker, or student, to really engage in this concept of ethical inquiry, right? For what purpose are we using AI here, right? Is it a emotional support purpose? Is it a learning tool? To what extent, right? So how far do we want to keep using this tool? If we're using it for, let's say, helping write or co-write a piece, is it rewriting it for us? Is it a brainstorming tool, right? So for what purpose, to what limit? And then who might be left out? So in the way we're approaching this AI tool and the way we're approaching this technology, who are we not thinking about? Who is not getting the benefit they should be getting? Are there communities, I think the pandemic showcased to us, are there communities that may not have access to the tool or may not? A lot of use of AI depends on having the infrastructure set up, right? And in the US, 25% of families still don't have reliable infrastructure and reliable access to the internet. You take that globally, the number is exponentially greater. So who's being left out and who's not getting the benefits? I think for the educators and the parents, maybe the first two are more practical. I think for the policymakers, that's something that we have, and I should disclose, SAS gets involved and participates in a lot of global conversations on the topic of AI with policy and non-policy makers alike. Who's being left out? Who is not getting the benefits? Who is getting too many benefits? And who is not even part of the conversation or part of our general considerations for this? So the ethical inquiry really, I think, is key and what I would want to leave the conversation with.
Thank you.
I would be happy to add on to that, but I feel like there's one of the stakeholders that's missing is the product developers. They are part of the conversation. They need recommendations more than anyone else because they're the ones that are putting out the products. So that's a big part of the work we've been doing within everyone.ai's nonprofit is creating workshops with policymakers, governments, institutions, then with companies, large companies, big tech companies, and also small startup around that, with investors, and with also children's advocate group and groups of educators. Because for me, the goal is really to first have a first conversation about like noticing that whatever choices we're making right now will have an impact in 3 months, 3 years, and 30 years on how children develop, on how we really impacting positively or negatively, depending on how we make decisions, what kind of guidelines we put in place. What I notice a lot through doing work with tech companies is that we don't know what we don't know. I come from child development sciences. I can't build an app. I have no idea how to do that. That's not my job. In the same way that, to some extent, understanding what are the best use cases, how do we make AI truly beneficial for children, that is not theirs. And so building those bridges between the two will really help them build interaction and products that really answer children's need, children's ability, make them age appropriate. And then, of course, we will need kind of like rules on top about what we absolutely cannot do with AI, with regulations, because then that kind of stops the conversation right there. You can't do it, so it's not happening. And then at the same time, we need to educate parents and educators, because in the long run, if you don't have a market for your product, then you won't be able to sell a product that wouldn't be beneficial for your users. So having that top-down approach, but as well as bottom-up, and working and creating those bridges is really key to going there, because what we are seeing when we talk to big tech companies is they're like, okay, we can not do anthropomorphic design, but the thing is right now that's what people want, because it increases engagement, so it increases our market share. So if I decide not to do that, what's going to happen is another company, the company that is asking me to remove the safeguard, if we say no, they're going to go to another model that does that. So I'm losing market share. But if we all agree, let's not do it, then it's not a race to the bottom, it's a race to the top. So having those conversations and creating those spaces where we can exchange on all levels and sharing expertise is also a great way to move forward, to make sure we encourage more beneficial uses of AI. And we also need to further research. There's already a lot, and there's still a lot more that we need to study specifically, which is really hard because AI is going much faster than social sciences. That takes more time. So it's kind of also that playing of catch up, but that's why I think we can go with strong hypotheses where there's more reason to think it's going to be risky than beneficial. For now, like, let's slow down there. And where we know it's going to be beneficial, then let's push for those kind of use cases.
Absolutely. This is a multi-layered approach from so many facets and ways, and different groups of people coming together based on like, what do they need, but then how are we collaborating and working toward, what we know is going to be purposeful and relevant and supportive. Dr. Kim, would you like?
Yes, so thank you again for this wonderful webinar session. Just very quick comment, and I think one group that I would also like to mention, we haven't talked too much about in this webinar, their parents. And I think children's technology use is a huge source of their stress because of the lack of guidance and the risks that are related to technology. So it was very interesting that last year when US Surgeon General released a report on parenting stress being significant threat to parental mental health, there were 5-6 major stressors that parents were reporting, and one of them was actually children's technology use. So, there's so much like lack of guidance. What do we take them away completely? Like how much? Like which one? I mean, they are in this space. It's so confused, and it causes so much conflicts that really not needed. For the relationship between parent and child. So I think, and that conflict itself that I think can be influencing the social and emotional well-being of those children, as well as parents. So I think that I just want to highlight that, I know it's difficult to come up with concrete recommendations, but it will be important to consider parents in the pictures together as we consider children's well-being. So yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists. And yes, as a parent, oh my gosh, what you said resonates so very much with those stressors and what are our kids doing and how quickly they're devouring these technology tools and moving on to another one before I can even catch up, right? And so again, I want to thank our panelists, and then also we do have a bit of time for questions, and want to highlight in the chat a comment from John Chadwick about social media use and banning children from under ages of 16 from using social media. And we're seeing some of that in the States as well, and in other countries where this regulatory, just they can't use it at all, right? Kind of approach. If there any additional comments to that, Kristi, you have shared with John in the chat as well. But if there's any other comments on that, or of course, any other members of our group here today that would like to ask any questions. And I'm already seeing thanks popping up in the chat as well.
Jacqueline, while folks are putting comments in there, I'll elaborate a tiny bit on the conversation in the chat. I suggest deeply, if you're looking at AI and you're looking at how to use AI and teach your students, et cetera, looking at the rest of the world and seeing what other countries are doing. I know countries are different, contexts are different, cultures are different, but there's still some interesting threads that we can see. And so the comment that I shared is that Australia at the end of last year published a bill forbidding the use of social media for children under 16 for a variety of different reasons. And of course, you can imagine big pushback, et cetera. But I think that's indicative of something, right? What that's indicative of, I'll let everybody on the call decide for themselves. But I would suggest looking at other countries, looking at the EU and the EU AI Act, looking at South Korea, looking at regulation in China, and what the laws are around how students and kids are allowed to use technology and what the safeguards are, whether there's guidance for parents, teachers, you name it. I think sometimes we can tend to focus very specific on our little domain, and I understand that, and I understand the geographic focus, but AI is used globally, and so I don't want us to miss the opportunity to learn from the rest of the world, even if we don't copy it exactly.
Absolutely. Well, our participants today are very grateful for the knowledge and experience today, and we have a few comments coming in. Vera suggests reading The Anxious Generation for a case. It makes a great case for the banning social media for under 16, but she comments that she's not sure how feasible it is with this kind of checkbox age verification culture that we're in. And then Cole Wallace has a question. What about social and emotional well-being for exceptional children with AI? Should there be specific guidance with that population? And okay, probably the easy answer is absolutely yes. But from our panelists, do you have any comments on Angela's question?
Just a quick comment is that we know that for children, especially who are neurodivergent, the way of engaging with AI is different. So trends that we might see with ADHD is like they like dopamine in the first place. So in that way, AI can provide a lot of dopamine, but which also makes them more attracted to that. So there are ways of using that in a way for good, to help, to motivate, to initiate tasks, and so to really help them also kind of use that to do like short-term intervention on how we can help them engage better with AI, but also better with their work, where it can really be like assistive for them. And we see different trends within the autism spectrum disorder on how they interact with AI chatbots. But right now I wish we had more literature on that, but the generative AI aspect is still pretty new in a way, like it hasn't been around for long. So there's a deep need to further research in that field so that we can really think what are the best way of using AI to help them rather than do the opposite and cause more risk to them. But yes, there will be a need for specific guidance. And I think for now, we need more elements to give very precise guidelines for that.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to say another big thank you to our panelists this morning. You have shared some really important things and perspectives with us. A lot of things for us to learn too, as more research and development comes out, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to really invest in that, as we know that's so important as we're thinking about our children's development, and even our own interactions with that. So again, thank you so much for joining us and lending your expertise to this panel this morning.